What is that thing that stops you from wanting to work on your car? You know, we all experience it. Just sometimes the last thing you can bring yourself to do is go out to the garage, go out to the car, just get back to work, even though you want it so badly. You want to drive the car, you want to finish the car. Well, I got it bad. I think with the Range Rover, it's because everything that I think I'm going to wrap up quickly takes 3 times longer than I could ever have imagined. And with Tina, it's been this scuttle panel. All of this work here, I thought that I would nail filler work on body work really quickly. And instead I've been back and forth, redoing it over and over and over again, trying to get it right. And then you just get this illusion that you waste hours and days. I mean, I don't mind admitting, I have spent days doing nothing, just trying to get my head round to a place where I want to come back out with enthusiasm rather than begrudgingly because I feel like I need to produce an episode. Anyway, before we do go into the Range Rover stuff, because there is lots of work to be seen, I want to say thank you to everyone on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. The people who reviewed and followed on Facebook, thank you so much. The commenters, the likers, the followers on Instagram and Twitter really have made it a lot easier to kind of get my head into the social media space and start doing that thing. And to be honest, it's the one little bit of work over the past month that I've managed to keep my head in the game with. And just had a little bit of fun going through footage and making little teasers and little posts for all of the little platforms there. So do find me on social media, find Soup Classic Motoring on Instagram and on Facebook, and Soup Classic Momo on Twitter. Anyway, here is the Range Rover. Enjoy it. The Range Rover. So last time I had made up this panel for the spare wheel well, that was the first thing I did. And in it went, first with some tacks and then the full welding. And if I could leave it like this, I would, because it looks really good this way, in the sense that it looks like I've done a really good job of shaping it. It's not a bad job, but as I clean it up, you'll see it, it could be better, but we're learning all the time. Maybe I'm being a bit hard on myself. It's not bad. The welding, as usual, I think the welder's still a little bit too hot. And maybe I didn't leave quite enough space, quite enough of a gap for the expansion of the metal. There is a small ding in this, just on the left-hand side, but it's not bad at all. So I turn my attention to the rest of this wheel well. Again, this panel, I should have just replaced the whole thing. That's not the mindset I've been in. And if you remember, the sheet of steel that I've been using to cut all these panels out of cost me 37 euros. If you couple that with the 60 euros the reel of welding wire has cost me and is still going strong, well, we're doing pretty good to have done all these repairs for 100 euros. I had a slight case of the gunner eye here. This line went way off center. Anyway, out that section came, it's still not quite fully square, but that's all right. And all I'm going to do here is offer up the new piece that I've templated against the piece that I've cut out and just start squeezing it into shape. Would have been nice if I'd gotten this in shot, wouldn't it? That's a bit better. Now this isn't going to achieve the full curvature, but it's going to get the shape started in the piece of metal, and then I can keep on forming it without the original piece holding it back, if you get me. So one last trial fitting to shave off the little bits of excess that I always leave just in case, and then I tack this in. It's a tiny bit flatter than it should be, but I don't think it's enough to put a flat spot in the spare wheel if it was there for too long. So I've started using this cheap acrylic primer on everything between times when I'm not working on the car, because what's happening is I walk away, I've left bare metal, and of course it starts to surface rust. I'd rather be peeling back this paint with the wire brush than surface rust. It just doesn't feel right letting things rust after you've replaced them. So I had just tacked this in the last time. It was the end of a day and I stopped. So back on it with the rest of the welding and a good clean up. This is not my finest work. Now, I cleaned up the underneath too, and this cleaned up much better, which just goes to show that as the welding is happening, you know, it's running downwards, gravity is pulling it downwards, and there are no real gaps in this. There's the odd blemish, but it's far cleaner than the top side. So that goes some way to show what's going on when you're welding. And in a way, it's kind of a bummer that this thing is nice and clean on the outside, and on the inside, where it would be more likely to be seen, it's a little bit rougher. Anyway, I finished up the outside section of that first wheel weld repair that we did, and trimmed off a little piece here that was just sticking out a bit too far. I've said this before, I always leave extra on my panels so that I'm not short of panel. I can always shave it back. I make them bigger intentionally. I just find it's way better than having to make it a second time because it was too small. So this side is looking pretty good, but we still have only tacked in the main rail for the floor. And if I'm honest with myself, I didn't tack it in very well. There's a bit of a bow in it. You can see it towards the right hand side of this screen. And if we look further along, we can see that I haven't really cut the floor very evenly. So I let some of these spot welds out. I repositioned the rail with no bow in it and then back on with the tack welds. And once they were in, I welded the whole thing up fully. It still looks a bit bowed, but some of this is due to the heat warp and will come back into shape. Now, I'd never tackled the fore section of this rail, so I made up a section, trimmed off the top of the rear seat base, and then offered up this panel. It's a much nicer fit, and only because I don't think I'd taken enough time, obviously, with trimming back the main two rails or the floor sections that they were going to weld to. But look how nice and even this is. For some reason, the welds just went nicer too. It's strange with this welder. Sometimes with the same settings, the same steel, it just doesn't weld as cleanly as other times when it almost acts like a gassed MIG. Now we're round to the offside, and again with the rail I undid some of the tack welds, straightened it up a bit better, and then tacked it back on. And with that one fully welded in, I was feeling very good about this because this is a milestone again. The floor is now ready to go in terms of it having a solid something to rivet to. Before all that happens though, we've got to clean this up. So I ground back all of these welds. Not too heavily, just enough to make them nice and smooth. And I won't zoom in too far, but take my word for it, they're not bad. A little bit pockmarked, but there's no holes here. There's just a few little divots. Doesn't this look good though? If you remember what it looked like before I cut everything out, this was an absolute rusty mess. And it had been filled with some horrible tacky black stuff. I'm not sure what it was, but the kung fu was strong with it, I'll tell you that much. Okay, there's a last hole in this offside. It's in the rear wheel arch, and the trailing edge of this wheel arch where the mud flap would be bolted to is also rotten. The hole, okay, I knew it was there, I cut it out very early on, but this section where the mud flap bolts to, I had convinced myself that it didn't need much of a repair, just a small one, and the reality is the whole thing, it needed to be cut out. So I'm so glad I didn't try and do it back then, because I would have cut out a small piece and tried to let some in, and it just would have been much more work than what I've done here, which is cut it out, make new sections, a fore section and a rear section, because it is a two-piece deal here, and just weld this stuff in nice and clean. Well, I say nice and clean. Scruffy as hell with a gasless MIG. So I'm letting the aft section in first because it kind of sits within the fore section. a little grind back to clean it up, and I let in the 4 section and welded up from above, thankfully, because I hate welding upside down or from below something. It's so tricky. Plus, you're far more in the line of fire in terms of welding spatter and hot rocks and stuff. So lastly, that hole then that I cut out. Now, I'd welded in a small section, but I'd never finished it, and I hadn't cleaned up the welds. So that was the first job. Now, this was a tricky panel, and as it turns out, this is probably the worst piece of panel work and welding I've done on this car. Even though it does look good as I watch it back, you'll see at the end, it's just a little bit rough. This is a wheel well, and an inner wheel well at that. It doesn't matter. It's going to take a hammering. It just needs to be solid, and it is. But I'd love this to be a bit better. I think I was starting to lose the will at this point. Now you see what I mean. It's just a bit rougher than everything else. And here's the thing. Never again will I restore a car without completely taking it apart. If it needs this much work, or even half this much work, if every part of the car needs some attention, then it should all come apart, because it's really invasive. And as you go along, not being able to have full access, that's the other thing. Any car I rebuild from now on will go on a rotisserie, I tell you that much. Any guys that I've seen do a good job have used them. It makes complete sense to me now, because you need to get access, and the better access you will have, especially when you're welding or grinding or cutting, if you're not having to be a contortionist to get into that space, you will do a better job. Simple as that. Okay, so we're on to these cross members. This is the last piece of the puzzle in terms of the 4 going in, and they just needed to be welded to the rails now that the rails were solid. And guess what happened? I just got the 2 tack welds in on the off side of the second cross beam, and the welding spool ran out. Can you believe it? The modifications I did to the welder so it would accept this larger 5 kilo spool happened almost a year ago. So all of the cross member stuff, all of the outer arch stuff, all of the axle, the sheet metal brake, and all of the panel work you've seen me do since then came from this one spool, which I think is amazing. I was watching the welder anytime it kind of stopped or the wire got caught or stuck or jammed. I always looked at the spool first because I assumed it's run out, it's finally run out. I was waiting for this thing to run out for months, and it just kept on going and going and going. So there you go. A 5 kilo spool gets the soup sealer recommendation. A massive thumbs up for that. Now, I don't remember my motivation being this high, but I didn't stop there. I wanted to keep going. So I looked around for stuff that I could do that didn't need welding. The first thing was I trimmed off the extra length I'd left in the boot floor rails. So they're nice and neat. They will need to be welded up and sealed, but for now it's nice and clean. And then I had a look to see what we were going to do about the seals. And the way the older models had the boot floor sealed in was with these rubber strips, corrugated rubber strips. They're very cool things, and I happen to have a set of them left over from a Range Rover that I had years ago. The only thing is the rear one has a completely different design. The later cars used a more conventional seal like you'd see running around the door of the car on the boot, and you see the ends of the metalwork that would hold that left here. I haven't welded on the rest of this lip that will hold the rubber seal because I wasn't sure I was going to do it that way yet. And looking at this old style rubber seal in place, what I think I might do is a concoction of both. So I'll cut this rubber seal back a bit so it fits better, and I'll use the later style steel lip and rubber seal that goes onto it. Anyway, that is as far as I got. I keep telling myself that one of these times it will just all seem to fly together. We haven't quite gotten there yet, obviously, but we will. We've got such a cool selection of stuff from viewers this time. The first is a guy called Gary Milner, who has an Elise, but Gary just found Soup recently and then systematically went through each episode, commenting on each one as he went, which was just so much stoke. It really kind of gave me a good kick in the ass every time I saw this this, just some comment coming through from Gary as he finished an episode, and he was all around the world as he did it because he's a pilot. But he spends most of his time between the UK and the Netherlands, and he lives, when he's in the Netherlands, in Zandvoort, which is a great place for the beach, but for the track, it's a great car guy's place. I spent some time there, and on a recent 10-hour drive back up there, he almost turned around straight off and went on a track day. I mean, he had a kip, it was an overnight thing, but I'm not sure I could match that enthusiasm. And again, I'm a rubbish car guy. But Gary, look, the Elise looks gorgeous, something I'd love to have, and thanks a million for getting in touch, and keep up the good stoke. All right, Nick Broadus and his pal dragged a CB750 out of the garage after many years and did what Nick describes as a restoration on it. And I asked him, well, who got to take it for the first spin? And he said, well, we both went out on it, which I just think is great crack. Dare I say it, there is a bike in the wings. I will bring a bike into the fold when I can get past all this stuff. Anyway, it is sitting there and I do love it. I've had it a very long time, but I'll keep stum about that for now. I want to send the Valet Pro kit though to a guy called Aaron, actually to a guy called Ray, who was the original owner of Aaron's Toyota Celica Supra. This car you see here, and how clean is this thing? It's stunning. What happened with this car was Ray bought it, I'm guessing, I'm trying to work it out, maybe 14, 15, 16 years ago as a parts car for his own Celica Supra, and on getting it home realised it was one of the cleanest ones, save for the accident damage, that he'd ever seen, so he restored it. And after driving it for a year, he sold it to Aaron, who had enthused over them since he was an early teen. Well, Aaron has been working on the car ever since, and look how magnificent this thing is. It is just such a beautifully kept car. He swapped out the original 2.8 motor for a 3-litre turbo, so it's got guts too. And yeah, this thing's just lovely. I don't think we got Celica Supras here. I don't think we got this model. We certainly had Celicas, and I think we had Supras, although they may have been imports. But this would certainly fall under a Japanese import in Ireland. I don't think I've ever seen one. I may have seen one. Anyway, guys, it's a credit to you. Ray has stayed with Aaron the whole way through, kind of mentored him, helped him out, and I just think it would be a nice thing to send Ray the kit. I'm sure they'll end up sharing it and using it together anyway. So guys, it's on its way to you, and thanks a million for sending in the photographs. I love to see that. If you do want to send your car story or your restoration story in, you can get me on social media now. DM me on social media, Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, or you can find my email address directly under the About section on YouTube. And I love to hear this stuff, so do it. Okay, time to tackle this horrible scuttle panel on Tina. Here it is, and all I'll say is there's a plan. With the Range Rover all tucked up in bed, I turned my attention to Tina. Now, I'd been putting this off because spraying this car is something I'm not looking forward to. Fine, I can spray up this whole scuttle panel, but then I go up the A-pillars. And where does it stop? Do I go across the whole roof? To be honest, I hadn't thought about it too hard because I knew it was a difficult question to answer. So I was nervous. Now you can see here the surface rust because I hadn't sprayed this up with some primer just to keep the rust off it. It's no big deal, but I prefer to be pulling back primer than surface rust. Anyway, there was a tiny bit of welding left to be done on the repairs at the bottom of the A-pillars, and as I did it, the spool on the welder finally ran out. So I changed it, and I was really happy with myself until the wire refused to come out of the other end of the welder. And I kept on winding the reel back to pull the wire out a bit, thinking it's just jammed up at the tip, and then running the welder again. And I bullheadedly kept on running the welder because when I finally stopped and opened it all up, I realized I'd been feeding wire all the way through into the handle and things were in a right old state. And if you look in this shot, you can actually see what had happened here. Somehow I'd managed to pull this hard enough that the lining that the wire runs through up into the gun had come free, and it was allowing the wire to just bunch up inside the handle. Now gladly this all went back together pretty well, And so far, the welder is going great, but in the hour or so it took me to figure all this out and sort it started raining. And I've had a rude awakening in terms of the weather, because we've had 2 months of almost uninterrupted sunshine, which lulled me into a sense of security in terms of working outside. Everything was going great, I hadn't a care in the world. And this was the first time I've been working that it started to even spit rain, and I realised straight away, I'm in trouble here. If I get a bad run of weather, I've got a bad month. The thinking cap is now on, and whatever happens, I have to build at least some sort of a lean-to or some sort of a roof over my head, which means I don't have to worry too much about the rain. Anyway, that is another day's work, and as you can see, I kept on plugging away at the repairs, and I got that last bit of welding done at the bottom of both A-pillars. So crunch time had rolled around. It was time to start trying to fill these areas just to smooth them out. And I was really hoping this was going to go quickly and easily. And frankly, this has been the worst section of work that I've ever done in this whole series. It has just been very, very tricky. The reason being partly because there's a curve obviously around the bottom of the windscreen, but there's also a curve running down towards these vents from the windscreen itself. So we've got this two-way deal going on. And how do you do that with a block? Well, you certainly don't do it with a square block, a hard-edged block. You're going to need something either flexible or rounded. And when I finally hit this with some primer so that I could see clearly what I'd done, I realized just how badly I'd done things. There are just as many kind of divots and high spots and low spots as there was before. They're just in different places. And this is where my mood started to drop. So I turned my attention elsewhere because there's a few other little isolated pieces of rust on Tina that I wanted to tackle. The main one being in the driver's sill. Now the sills on the car are solid except for 2 spots on this driver's sill. So I pulled the seat out because that seat's taken a bit of a hammering already and we don't need any more mishaps. So with that out, I was able to happily grind away. And I was so glad that I'd taken stock of things before I did, because behind this panel, the inner section directly behind it, runs part of the wiring loom. So all I had to do was release that and pull it back out of the way. And what I did next was I got some more of our nice big thick sheet of plastic and I let it into the car between the work area and the interior, just to save from any spatter hitting the carpet or anything else. Same old story, a bit of templating and some welding, and this went very, very nicely. And I hit it with some of that nice primer I have, and then I was able to let in the upper section. Now what I haven't done yet is clean this up, smooth it flat and paint it. I was just going to use the mojo of getting this done nicely to go back and hit the filler areas again. So we'll tackle this a little bit later. So back up top. We're on the scuttle story again, and I peeled back everything and I went in again with some filler. This time I laid it much more evenly and thickly so I could pull it back slowly, being very diligent about it. And lesson 2 was learned. The grade of paper I was using, because I was being a little bit lazy, was too harsh, and it scored both the filler and the paint to a depth that I wouldn't be able to sand out without losing the filler anyway. So we went for round 3. Out came that layer of filler. This time the idea was to put it very locally so that there would be less work involved. And while waiting for that filler to go off, I turned my attention back over to the offside A-pillar, where weirdly there were new holes. I don't understand how I missed these before. Why did I think this was okay? Well, there was nothing for it. I cut out another section at the bottom of this repair and I made up a new panel. And this is a funky panel because this thing curves in every direction. Luckily it's a small panel and the curves don't really oppose each other in a sense of it being hard to form. So I let that in. But this area is just starting to look like such a mess. And I filled it badly. And I should point out, I filled up top where we had done a repair at the top of the offside A-pillar too. So by the evening this stuff had gone off pretty well, and I began the slow process of cutting it back with sandpaper. And already I knew that I'd gone too far on some of these and I would have to go back in with filler. But as I've learned since, It's wrong to expect to be able to do this with one layer of filler in many cases. It's not uncommon to fill, sand, and then fill again. But I didn't know that. And by instinct, I did try that. Now, as I went, I was gaining experience at least, maybe not skill just yet, but certainly experience. And some of the work started to look at least better than it had done before. You can see here I've missed 2 spots in this grill. But at the bottom of the near side A-pillar, it's by no means perfect, but it's not bad. I could probably cut this back, maybe do a light skim again and have a very good finish here. But I just wasn't happy, I really wasn't. And at the end of this day, the last thing I was thinking was, that's not bad. I hated this work. Up top, again, not bad now that I look back at it, but I was not happy at the time. And no amount of camera work, smoke or mirrors is going to hide the fact that the bottom of the offside A-pillar is not good at all. And I was texting a buddy, a guy who is a professional body man, and I was telling him how badly it was going for me. And I sent him some photographs. He said, look, bring it up here. You don't have the right equipment, you don't have the right tools, and you don't have the right knowledge. I will show you how to do it. You can do it under our supervision with all of the stuff you need, and you'll get it done. And that is exactly what is going to happen. So Tina is going to take a trip on a flatbed ASAP, and I cannot wait to have someone who knows what they're doing make sure that I get a good job done, because this car will go back to Rob, at least in places, better than when he lent it to me. Now, I need to go missing more often, obviously, because to my new patrons, Aaron Judd, Bill McEwen, Brad Vermont, David Jones, Ivan LeCourcier, Jonathan Evans, Jonathan Stockin, Lars Alstrup, Mike Hennessy and Tristan Monday. Gents, I've got another beer open. Cheers. We're getting really close to a point where it will be stress-free, budget-wise, for me producing soup. And each time one of you comes on board, it really gives me a pep in my step, so thank you. Now, just something I've never said before is that soup, it converts subscribers really well, like a much higher percentage than your average channel. The problem we're having is getting it under enough noses. The amount of people that have actually seen soup is tiny, like it really is. Compared to most YouTube channels, it is so tiny. I'm doing something wrong in terms of getting it out there, getting it shared. So if you can share it, please do. Go back, watch other episodes, go back, start from the start. If this is your first one, I think you'll find the interviews interesting, and we've got some brilliant ones to come. So I'll be back ASAP with Mojo in tow and on fighting form. Until then, don't give up on your car, and good luck.